Board of Education meeting on September 18th, 2024. Tonight we are focused on our work session about facilities. Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Do we have a motion to appoint a clerk pro tem for the meeting?
So moved. Second.
Okay, that's clerk will be Dr. Champ. Yep. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm pleased to welcome KGD, our architectural firm, to this meeting. They will take us through the culmination of 3 important studies: the capacity study, the building condition survey, and the 5-year plan. The goal is to help the board understand the facilities needs within our district. Our stated goal around facilities is to develop and implement a plan for necessary facilities updates. This work session is the first step in gathering the information we need to determine our priorities and scope of the updates. I had a sneak peek at the findings during the Facilities Committee meeting this morning. I'm happy to report that our district facilities are well cared for and support the district's robust programming. However, we need to recognize that our facilities are aging and require updates, and we should also think through additional updates that will provide superior support for programming and our students overall. Before we move on to the superintendent's remarks, I want to provide a brief update on flood mitigation. We are, of course, aware that the Village of Pelham voted to proceed with eminent domain for an easement at Julian's Playground. Our position has not changed. While we support flood mitigation efforts, we oppose an easement due to the additional burdens it would place on the district, both during and after the project and in perpetuity. There were other options on the table that I continue to believe are better for the community and the school district. What we have now is the start of a legal proceeding against the school district, despite the Village of Pelham having other options. With that said, we will continue to aim to reach a settlement that addresses flooding while also protecting the interests of the school district. I'd like to give the board the opportunity to comment on that if they'd like.
Yeah, I have a comment. So I thank you, Jackie, for reading what you just read. So I feel the same. I have to concur that I feel like there are other options. And I also feel like I'm repeating myself. We've said this a number of times, but it's disappointing to continue to see the process now go through these legal proceedings and for the district to have eminent domain declared against it by another entity that we have historically been great partners with. And I think that's what's disappointing to me, to know that there are other options. And I think if we were able to come together to talk about those in a way that exemplifies our partnership and our willingness as a district to help with flood mitigation, we'd actually be able to make some significant progress, not have to involve lawyers in the way that we've had, and be real partners in this solution, looking at both sides of the situation, recognizing as trustees that we have to, it's our duty to take into account what is best for the district, not just now, but years from now when we're all gone, but at the same time recognizing that we've been, as always, partners with the village and never had in mind that we were going to want to do anything with that land as far as flood mitigation, but when presented to us, we're clearly willing to consider different ways to come up with a solution. And so I'm going to remain hopeful that we can get to a place of compromise so that this doesn't have to become and continue to be a long, drawn-out process.
So
I would like to say, I'm going to borrow a phrase here from Jim. We're Team Pelham, right? Team Pelham all the way. And it's sad that Team Pelham is not all Team Pelham the way it seems, because we are going through this eminent domain. As a board, this was presented to us last October during a facilities committee. And, you know, the process, what it was presented to us was an easement. An easement just doesn't work for the school district because it will have us own that. And a clear example of what that would mean is when they came a month ago or during the summer just to drill holes, they left a mess. And it's unfortunate because we got called and we had to take care of it. And that was only 4 little holes that they had to drill. Imagine the process of building this massive tank and enclosure and all that they want to do there. So our proposal has always been, if you want it, you could own it, you could take it. We will work with you on making sure this happens, because we do want flood mitigation, but we also want the school district to have land and to have places where we could expand our facilities, and that's why we're here today, to talk about facilities and our needs. So it is sad that we couldn't come to a compromise, and we have plenty of proposals to ensure that this will be worked, you know, and come to a good outcome. And it is unfortunate that that was not accepted in any of the forms we proposed out there. Again, an easement just doesn't work. As a school district, I don't think we should own a piece of land that has these, you know, these tanks on it or these diesel engines. That's just, we're not in the business of that. We're in the business of educating students. So it's better if we don't own the land versus an easement, and that's always been our, kind of our stand. And we've always tried to make sure that the village understood that and why we wanted that. And again, we had plenty of proposals that I felt could have been acceptable to both parties. So it is unfortunate. And again, I still believe we're Team Pelham and that we could come back to the table and have a compromise.
I just want to add, as one of the newer board members, I think just elevating the compromise, because I do believe we have common interests, and so working together to know those common interests to find solutions, I think, is something really important, and I hope to join you all in the town to look at it in that light and find these solutions together. So
I guess I'll just say I agree. It's unfortunate that we've come to this place, but I'm hopeful that maybe, you know, having formally started the eminent domain process, and both sides wanting to hopefully not spend a lot of time on lawyers, despite my being one, that hopefully that can be sort of an impetus for us to reach a settlement that everyone can work towards, and I'm hopeful that we can get there.
Thank you all. Appreciate you sharing your perspectives there. And welcome everyone to Alumni Hall. It's been a long time since we've had a board meeting here. I tonight want to very much thank the members of the administrative team who are here. I know the cabinet is always here, so thank you for your continued faithful support. Our administrative team, who have run an entire school day and have one to start up bright and early tomorrow morning, are here as well, so thank you for your presence. Thank you for really as well for this entire team in partnership with KG&D, and thank you for being here tonight as well. Thank you, John, in the back too, who have been critical partners in helping to assemble the information that's going to be presented tonight to the board. I think this is they've been working with us all along. I know KG&D, Russ and Walter have met with Jim and John and I to really kick this process off. And we're really happy tonight to come to you prepared to go through these key documents that Jackie listed. So tonight, our purpose is really to go deep, to take a deeper dive into the facilities needs of the district. So between the enrollment demographic projections, the facilities utilization, and the building conditions study and 5-year plan, that should lay a really strong foundation for the board on the basics of kind of what are the conditions of our buildings. The purpose tonight is not to make decisions or to start to the prioritization process, but the board will eventually need to prioritize and determine what the facilities needs, both on the long and short term, are, that we're going to need to be looking at more closely, and also paired with that over the next couple of months, talking about the financial strategies to support those identified needs. So clearly, there will be more discussion and analysis in the days and weeks and months ahead. So don't feel that pressure tonight. Again, tonight is about understanding, clarifying, and getting a really deep understanding for the full board to have that same foundation. And we're really pleased tonight to have Russ Davidson and Walter Hauser from KGD here to give us the most up-to-date information and to really help build that foundation for us. I think tonight, my hope is that, A, we get clarification on our current situation with facilities. Where do we stand with things? And I know John Condon was sharing this with the Facilities Committee earlier. The state requires districts have a 5-year building condition study, and it's supposed to be done on a 5-year cycle. They changed their timing process a few years ago, so they no longer had everyone doing it at the same time. They actually started to stagger it, and we were on one of the later rotations. So this is actually our first building condition study in 9 years. So it's perfect timing. I think we're just wrapping up the final pieces of the 2018 bond. So again, it's another perfect opportunity to be revisiting this discussion. And as part of this, we will also then, especially as you get into October, be having more conversations about the financial pieces and how the puzzle pieces will fit together to help us meet our long and short-term needs. So you'll gain an understanding tonight of certainly the situation. We're hoping to have some conversation about certainly the complexities that come with that. We all know there will be competing interests, as that word was mentioned earlier. I think it's a perfect word. When we get into this kind of work, there are competing interests, and there are different priorities we're going to have to weigh through. So to start to talk about what some of those are, and then before we end, certainly we want to know if there's areas that need clarification or different additional information that the board would need as we continue through this process. I do think it's important to say, and Russ said it beautifully during our meeting earlier, so I'm going to let him say it again so that we reiterate the message. It's really important to know that we are delivering on the academic program for our students. As a district, we are doing that now, and we are doing it well. We're doing it with integrity. We are also, because two things can be true at the same time, in a position of looking at our facilities, because we do recognize there comes a point where facilities can impact program and instruction. So while we are delivering, we also want to take a look at what are those facilities issues that we could look at to address and mitigate and provide an even better opportunity for our students across the board. So that is my preface. I think I'm going to, at this point, turn the bulk of our evening over to our professionals, Russ Davidson and Walter Hauser from KGD. I know they're well known to many of us, but I'll let them introduce themselves. If you guys want to shift over at all to your yeah, Will's not able.
Yeah, just as a school architects, we would like to think that good school buildings make for great schools, but it's really teachers and programs and administrators that make great schools. But it is important that the buildings don't get in the way. Right. And I think that you've got some older buildings that are getting close to being impediments more than anything. So we're happy to do this as more of a conversation, because if this is a work session, if that's okay, Jackie and Cheryl, and take questions as we go, because there's a lot of information here. There's a lot behind it. I personally did a lot of the visits on the architectural side, which is a little unusual, but we actually led a large team. So there's been roofing consultants, masonry consultants, electrical engineers, plumbing engineers, HVAC engineers, and then a lot of work in our office as well.
And Russ, can I add in too, just for the board, you each have a binder that we put together. It's not a bond talk without a binder. So in here, you do have some of the documents that Russ will be referencing for backup. So you have his presentation, which is here. We did update, I think, 1 or 2 slides since we copied this, so we get you updates afterwards. You have the full demographic study, the full capacity study, the full 5-year capital plan, and then some supplemental information that I put together from conversations with the administrators, as well as some information just on school zones and historical enrollments. And then once we get to October, we'll start to fill out some information in the financial section. So if you want to reference on paper anything that Russ is showing us, it's there for you in section 2. And then if you want to look at the backup, it's there as well.
So the 4 key questions that the studies address are, up on the screen, but it's basically enrollment versus capacity. What's the condition of your buildings? What do you need to do to them to keep them in good condition? And then it's the other things that are program related that might be missing in some of your schools. So capacity is a function of enrollment, number of assignable classrooms, size of classrooms, of course, class size, and then program offerings, especially at the secondary level. And so we have the square footage of every room in your district in one big Excel spreadsheet, and we know your class sizes, and we have done this capacity study not based on the number of rooms, but on the square footage of each room, so that this really treats, it level sets all your buildings in the same square feet per student, whether your classroom's undersized or full-sized. Believe it or not, there is no uniform capacity analysis method in place at state ed. So we have adopted what New York City uses and some of the state ed regulations. So this is sort of a custom algorithm that we do. And it starts with enrollment. So this slide is much better seen in your binder, I'm sure. But basically what it says is, even though your overall enrollment, you've experienced this before, you are heading up all around, and especially a sustained increase in enrollment at the middle school and then high school. And so those are the numbers to be somewhat concerned with. You'll see different lengths into those lines, because when you're planning capital facilities, you generally plan K-5 or K-6 for 5 years out, and 7 through 12, 10 years out. But of course, you don't have a 7 through 12 building, so we put middle school in around 8 years. And that's because that's the life of a reliable enrollment projection. So that's why the state wants you to plan for those horizons, because elementary school enrollment projections are tied to statistical migration ratios from grade to grade. But obviously, kindergarten, they go back 5 years and they look at birth records in the Pelham area. So birth records are only 5 years old, and no one's ever been any good at predicting how many children will be born. So they don't allow you to go past that. So this is the sum of the capacity study. It's a little complicated. I'm not going to go through it in painstaking detail, but the first two columns are enrollment. The second one is what Western Suffolk BOCES thought would be your enrollment, and the other column is what the building principals told me their enrollment was when I showed up in their offices to interview them. So remarkably close, but there are some differences. And then the projected enrollment and the projection year, and then the maximum enrollment in 10 years, and the year that will occur. So we put in the class size standards here that we got from administrators that tie back to teacher contracts, I believe. So those are important numbers. And then for the middle school and high school, we actually bracketed it for class sizes of 28, 26, and 24. So you can see capacity on each one of them. So when you look at the far right column, you'll see that in Colonial, you're headed towards a shortage of seats of 26. And at Hutchinson, Trish is holding on to an extra 71 seats. But Prospect Hill 12 and Siwanoy 27. So you can see that there's going to be squeezes in those buildings coming forward, because when you look at 27, that's really probably 2 more classes that need to be found there, not 1. And at the middle school, at 28 students per class, you're fine. You have additional capacity. At 26, you have additional capacity. At 24, you're 10 seats short. But probably of the greatest concern from a capacity point of view is the high school, because at 28 seats per class, you're a shortfall of 68. And then you see that goes up to 108 and 148. So that's pretty serious, because then you're looking at, 5 to 7 classrooms. And just another word on capacity study. We mentioned that it's done by the square foot, but we also use something called the room fill ratio or programming efficiency. And the best way to understand that factor is, especially in a smaller building, like Cheryl was talking about Siwanoy, where you have 2 or 3 sections. So if your class size is, you want 25 students in 4th grade, it's really hard to make exactly 50 4th graders show up every year. Sometimes 38 show up, sometimes 54 show up. So the programming efficiency is a factor that downsizes the room based on the reality that you're going to have trouble hitting the exact class size number each time. So programming efficiency, a room fill ratio, is used in both primary and secondary. And then in the secondary schools, it gets a little bit more complicated because you have a rotating schedule. And if you've ever tried to schedule a building in a secondary rotating schedule, it's pretty near impossible to fill every room to capacity in every period. So you use something there called a room utilization. And if you're a good scheduler, and I'm sure you're good here, it's about 7 out of 9 periods a day for general ed. And then your special subjects in science and art, where you should have a period to clean up in between, it should be more like 5 out of 9 periods a day. So those are the things that are factored in here that get these functional capacity numbers. So you can always go above this, and you probably are at the middle school and high school, and you do that by using the rooms more, but that can inhibit program offerings. When we've seen overcrowded schools, we've seen 11th graders who can't take health until 12th grade because there's no room. So if you have a lot of AP offerings, you're not going to cancel a class if only 14 people show up. So that also affects your capacities. So the other things that affect capacities are special ed programs and support programs. So this is a fresh study. It's based on your programs and the spaces you want in a school. And yes, there will be people who say, but I went to the high school when there was 1,400 people here and there was plenty of room. And so the answer is a little complex. But so this is just graphically that shows the sort of current enrollment projected. Third is projected max, and then the light blue is the functional capacity. There you can see it for the middle school and high school. And this is another sort of more qualitative analysis of the square footage. And this speaks to 2 things, which is the size of classrooms and the amount of support space. One of the biggest changes in school design over the last 40 or 50 years is the amount of non-assignable classroom space that is needed to deliver your educational program. So this is special ed resource. This is dedicated self-contained special ed. This is English language learning, psychologists, social workers, testing accommodations. So you can see that in the Hutchinson building, you have just under 10 square feet per student of sort of instructional support space. And then at Siwanoy, you have about 1.5 square feet per student. There's no other space there for these programs.
And Russ, is there any standard or guideline or goal, or is it just an assessment?
There
of
really
what is?
isn't.
Okay.
I would say that Hutch seems to have enough for your programs. But the other one in the blue column is just the amount of room per student. So this is just, you can see that over 50 square feet at Hutch and closer to 40 and under 40 at Siwanoy. So it's a pretty big qualitative difference when you're looking at 20% difference in space per student across the elementaries.
Can I ask another question to you?
Sure.
How does this compare with other similar age buildings that you're, in your experience?
Nothing that we're going to tell you here is unique to Pelham. This is all about the age of Simonway, Prospect Hill, Colonial, and the high school. We've done this study for Yonkers, Katona, Croton, Middletown. You find this all with the older buildings. It is a classic problem, the lack of instructional support space. That's why you see things happening in hallways. As buildings enrollment decline, it's fairly common that either full-size rooms are used for instructional support, or they're dividing older classrooms in half for instructional support. But these are not unique problems to Pelham. It's because your buildings are old and were designed by a completely different paradigm for education.
Thank you.
Speaking of which, there's your picture of a classroom in Hutch and a classroom in Colonial. So we're going to talk about the building conditions survey, and I will let Walt jump in a little as well on this one, but our sort of goal in doing your building conditions survey was to identify what needs to be done in the building eventually to make them all as good as a new building. So you're going to find out in a few minutes, you have nothing that is urgent. You have no priority ones. Your buildings are well maintained. John didn't pay me to say that, but they are well maintained, and you're doing a great job with the older buildings. But there's a lot, most of what we're looking at in your buildings are changing standards. I think that Prospect Hill was built in 1929. Nobody air-conditioned a school in 1929. You barely air-conditioned a home. They barely had cars. But now, the only place most people go where there's not air conditioning are schools. Libraries, we often hear that my car is better air-conditioned than my classroom. And things like casework and windows, but HVAC is a big priority. I don't know if you want to add anything about the BCS process.
No, I think you covered it. I can maybe jump in on some of the priority slides.
So our mechanical engineering team met with John, and we talked a lot about heating plant, ventilation, and air conditioning. So this is just a little side trip into the specialty, because it's almost half of your overall identified cost needs are in HVAC work. And obviously anything can be prioritized and it can be phased in, but you did a major capital project, I think 30 or 35 years ago, and replaced all your boilers, which is a great idea. But they're all coming of age now at the same time. So you have issues with steam boilers at Colonial, Simonway, Prospect Hill, and the high school. So if any of you grew up in a house with steam heat the way I did, your choices are you have heat or not. And it's very difficult to control, it's pretty noisy, and it's not very energy efficient. And so even when you replace your boilers, though, you didn't replace all the piping, for example, in this building. And so you're looking at some piping systems that are 50, 80 years old. So they're not going to make it, especially, and this is the irony, if you put a brand new steam boiler in there that's pumping steam at a high pounds per square inch, piping fails. So it's a big project to replace steam with steam, but the question is that really the right thing to do? Because it's really not efficient. It's a type of heating system that is fading away in the world, and it's still difficult to control. It's still not energy efficient. And a lot of parts and other allied equipment, especially related to ventilation, are not as frequently designed for steam systems. So what has been included in your costs is new efficient hot water boilers and new piping throughout these buildings. And yes, it is a lot more expensive, which is what's shown here on the slide, but most of that is for piping. So you could say, well, it's all brand new hot water piping. It's not apples to apples because we're reusing a lot of steam piping in the column above. But it'll be a lot more efficient, it'll be a lot easier to control, and it will interact a lot better with the ventilation and air conditioning equipment, which is in that third column. So one of the other big categories of, again, age-related expectations is fresh air and ventilation. So you have systems that are in place. They are sort of pieced together. I think at SciWNA, our engineers identified 5 different types of systems in the building to provide fresh air because every room needs a different solution. They take a little window here, they make a louver there. But if you replace your heating system, the code is going to require you to upgrade to current ventilation standards. And I think you want to do that anyway. Because indoor air quality is really important, especially for younger people. And it allows you to filter fresh air and bring in the code compliant amount of fresh air. We were hearing that indoor air quality and fresh air was a big priority for schools in 2019 and earlier. And then since COVID, we're hearing it double, because this allows you to have filtered fresh air, which is really important. Several of our schools experienced that haze with the fires a few years, last year, I believe, and they had to shut all the windows, and it was not comfortable. And filtered fresh air would allow you to have, healthy, clean air even in that environment. And then obviously spreading germs is a lot easier to deal with filtered fresh air. So we've also included mechanical cooling and ventilation, which you can see is a big cost. And the little line on the bottom there, it says those costs do not include general construction related to HVAC, but we did include it later. The building conditions survey sort of mandates that we sort every cost by system. So when you do this prioritization that Cheryl mentions is going forward, we're going to start to meld these things together to come up with a project that makes sense at each location that includes all the related work that's required.
Russ, on that, there's just this topic, and it may be jumping out of order, and if so, feel free to say we'll address it later. I know that in Facilities Committee, we talked some too about thinking about sustainable approaches since we're looking at these opportunities. Could you just speak a little bit about that now or later on in the presentation?
The current slide talks about ground source heat pump.
Perfect timing.
So the thinking really was that in talking with John and our mechanical engineering team, let's propose this hot water system with ventilation and air source heat pumps. But there will be a whole design process after you set a scope and budget. But we do need to have sort of a concept. So air source heat pumps are very, very energy efficient. They're not linked to fossil fuel use. But an alternate system would be ground source heat pump, or something, sometimes people call it geothermal. So it uses the heat sink of the ground to heat and cool water, which then is spread through the building as water or cool or warm air. But it has a high first cost because you have to drill a lot of wells in the ground. So it's going to add a lot of first cost. And this is a very back of the napkin estimate for the cost of the well field. So this is the net change. It doesn't replace the other costs. It's an add to the other costs. So at Colonial, it would be an additional $900,000, SciWNA an additional $1 million, Prospect Hill $1.4 million, and the high school $3.5 million. So if you've never seen a ground source heat pump installation, you basically strip away all the topsoil and you bring in well drilling rigs, and they drill 20 or 50 or 80 wells, 395 feet deep. They put a loop of piping in it, they connect them below frost line, then you put the field or the parking lot or the playground back, and they're there for 100 years and you never touch them, and they require no maintenance. But it is messy. It is not a pretty thing. We've been involved with it. We did it at the White Plains Post Road School. We're doing it now at a large middle school in Middletown. There are some grant programs available that can offset, theoretically, this first cost of the well field. So I'm not sure it's time to just cross it off the list just yet. But you need to be cognizant of the fact that at a school like Colonial, it would mean taking out your entire playground to put these wells in, put them in, put the playground back. And that's probably a 6 to 9 month process. Prospect Hill, we might be able to find a playing field or something that we don't have to move. Siwanoy, it would again probably be that back playing field. You can put them under buildings, but the high school, you have some fields out here where it could work, but we're committed to sustainable approaches and want to help you with it. But this does carry a high first cost. Yes.
Sorry, is there any information around long-term savings or, that offset or that are included in that?
So, great question. So there's two issues with savings. First, first the bad news. Whenever we add ventilation and air conditioning to buildings, your energy costs will go up because you're heating and cooling a lot more air. So when you take a building like Siwanoy, if you took out all the window AC units, it probably is pretty low energy costs because there's not a lot of ventilation, there's not a lot of forced mechanical cooling. And when we add ventilation and cooling, your energy costs will increase. But if you took a conventional HVAC system with ventilation and cooling compared to ground source heat pump, the initial first cost of the more expensive system would get paid back in energy savings in around 10 to 15 years when you compare them apples to apples. Does that answer your question? And one of the other things about ground source heat pump, and I think it's okay because you use a lot of buildings in the summer for summer camp, is you sort of need a balanced heating and cooling load for them to be efficient. So that was one of the reasons that they weren't used in schools a lot early on, is because you went away in the summer. But in communities like Pelham and many Hudson Valley communities, schools are really used year-round by different aspects of the community.
I don't want to get too sidetracked, but could you talk for 30 seconds about the choices or trade-offs between the air source and the ground source, other than upfront costs? Like, why would you choose one over the other long-term, or not?
Well, ground source used to be by far the more energy-efficient approach, but as you've probably heard that heat pump technology has really done well in the last 5 years, where I used to have a house with heat pump when I moved in 18 years ago. They said if it goes below 35 degrees, you're going to have to turn on electric resistant heat. And when our last unit was replaced, they says if it goes below 5 degrees, you're going to have to turn on your electric resistant heat. So electric heat pump technology is more affordable, lower first costs, and it's become very energy efficient. We just opened a brand new building, 100,000 square feet, that's 100% air source heat pump, no boiler at all. So cost and efficiency is caught up a lot with electric, with air source heat pump. Ground source heat pump is not experimental. It's been around for a long time. It's invisible. It's a little quieter. Our brand new building with air source heat pump has, I think, 38 heat pump units that look like giant suitcases on the roof. And, you know, I don't know where you would put them on Siwanoy, or a building like Colonial that has, you know, really elegant sloping roofs. So they're gonna be very visible. You know, the Post Road School that we did in White Plains, you'll hardly see any equipment anywhere. The equipment inside the building for either system is about the same. It's really how do you cool the water, and how's that achieved? Is that enough?
Yeah, that's helpful, thank you.
Okay. So, one of the things,
Sorry, and you said that the HVAC and AC, or the boiler replacement and AC, whichever program, that's about half the cost of what we'll see?
yep, we'll come up on that slide shortly.
Just confirm.
Yep. So one of the things that's in the state system for building condition survey is to prioritize items. This is their system of prioritization, not yours. You get to choose what you need to do. And again, the building condition survey is an instrument that's filed online. It has a mind-numbing 64 pages per building, and that's entered online, and it is what it is. The 5-year plan is your document, and that needs to be on file at State Ed for whenever you submit a capital project. We've never seen one denied if it wasn't on the 5-year plan, but theoretically they could do that. So if you said, I want to build a swimming pool, but your 5-year plan says you have no ventilation or no elevator in a number of buildings, they probably would say, I don't think we're going to aid your swimming pool. You better get back to the more essential work. So that's generally the feeling. When I speak to State Ed, I said, well, you never do anything with the building condition survey or 5-year plan. And they say, no, we make sure you have one. So that's really their job. Priority 1 means that there's an imminent health and safety problem, and it needs to be repaired. You have none of those. Your buildings are well taken care of again. It's pretty rare that we see absolutely nothing in that column. You have only a few things at the high school in priority 2, which is a pending health and safety issue. And I believe it's fire alarm related, and I believe that's because the code has changed. So it's, again, nobody did anything wrong. Priority 3 is things that are aging out, that are going to, or have exceeded their expected useful life, or will exceed their expected useful life in the interval of this next 5-year plan. And that's most of the work. And this is, again, simply related to the age of your buildings. And then priority 4 is things that you sort of should do that you, to update your facilities. So you'll see in there, I think one of the things that I kept seeing at Siwanoy, Colonial, and Prospect Hill was every time I went into a classroom and looked at the sink cabinet, I saw some vintage Formica and metal edging and pegboard or curtains across the front of it. It's all clean, it's usable. No one would have that in their home. No one would have that in their home. And those are the things that are sort of should be done in the priority 4. Besides the shock on the numbers, this is a different way of sorting it by school and by type of work. So you'll see here in site work at the high school, there's $4.5 million. Those are priority 4 items to convert your grass fields to synthetic turf. You may never do it, but it's listed here because it's a possible thing that you may or may not want to prioritize. Glover Field is replacement of a turf field further out, not the one that you currently have in design. and some work at the field house that you need to do to replace that, the roof. So then the building envelope is mostly masonry and windows. So you have a lot of window issues district-wide. High school needs the windows replaced again. Prospect, Siwana, and Colonial all are facing window failures. So this is, it's a visual environment thing. We have lots of pictures of foggy glass where the seals have failed, but it's also an energy efficient issue. Roof work, again, we have a roof consultant who's been through your roofs and helps you keep after them. And you really have some things coming due. Prospect Hill, this beautiful slate roof is really done. It owes you nothing. It made it 100 years.
It's done its time.
It's time.
Is that a replacement in kind
That's what's
estimate?
priced.
Thank you.
That's what's priced.
Slate.
Yeah, I mean, that often becomes a big debate. There are some slate alternatives out there, but I think this is slate for slate. And we've seen our clients happiest with slate roofs when they get new slate roofs. Some of these substitutes are okay. The next big column, you take a deep breath, which is the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, HVAC only. And you'll see that the total at the bottom there is $52 million. And at the bottom right, the total is 95. So it's actually more than half of this work is HVAC. There are some other mechanical, electrical, and plumbing items, which is the next column. And then general construction are things that most people care about, like new casework, doors, flooring, and finishes. Again, it's almost all age-related. And if you were able to spend and do everything to update every building to sort of as new status, the total is just under 96 million, which is a lot of money, we understand, but it's also not an unusual amount of money for the amount of square footage and the age of your buildings. So we have one slide that sort of goes through each thing at Colonial, each school. So it's still a lot of the heating system work, windows, classroom interiors, some accessibility issues with the interior toilet rooms. Your security vestibule is adequate, but it could be better. And then there are some issues with capacity, which could involve possibly an additional cafeteria or some classrooms. We think Hutch was a really well-designed building. The principal's excellent, so we're not going to talk about that.
Who designed it?
I'm not sure. The Prospect Hill, it's actually a fairly large building, Prospect Hill, but steam to hot water is needed. Slate roof we talked about. There's also a waterproofing issue, site drainage on the uphill side of that building that really needs to be addressed. There's one set of classrooms on the lower floor up against that shouldn't be classrooms. They're not, really not suitable. And the classroom interiors are also dated. The windows need to be replaced. And I would say Prospect Hill, while it has good-sized rooms, it has no instructional support space, really. So we'd like to find a way to use the hallways or some way of introducing more instructional support space. It also does have an auditorium, and then, what's it called when it's a cafeteria and gymnasium? Cafanasium?
Cafeteria.
No, it's a... So it has two common spaces, but in all three buildings, the cafeteria and gymnasium sort of coexist. And that's programmatically and a scheduling problem for the buildings. And it would be more typical in buildings of that size that there would at least be two, similar to what's at Hutch, which has a dedicated cafeteria with a stage and a dedicated gym. So I think that's something that you've got to address at some point, especially in Siwanoy and Colonial, where you only have the one space. And if you think it's easy to deal with, you should go to Colonial and see where they store the cafeteria tables and watch them do that process. So Siwanoy has a lot of the same issues, but the big sort of issue at Siwanoy, which is surprising to find, is the lack of an interior accessible route. It is a split-level building. I think it has 7 floor levels, none of which are accessible to the other. So 1 or 2 elevators are needed in that building, or elevator and lift, and as well as prime entrance is being accessible. So as many of you know, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. So the grace period has long been over. You do make reasonable accommodations, and you do what you can. You're doing an excellent job with it, but it's not a forever solution. And it seems like that might be one of the things that rises higher in your priorities.
And might that be something that state ed would say, hey, don't put a, don't look at a swimming pool right now, you need to do.
Yeah, I think so what happens with something like that, so if you needed a fire alarm system at Siwanoy, they wouldn't stop you. But we have to fill out a form that says what's non-compliant. They would see that elevator there and they would say, we'll let you do the fire alarm, but district, you have to write us a letter and tell us when you're gonna put the elevator in. So that's the only thing I've seen them sort of enforce these things, but.
Yeah, and I should add, I know this was a large piece of the discussion back in 2017, 2018, so I know it's something that's been on the district's radar, and I appreciate you highlighting that we have made reasonable accommodations, but exactly to your point, that's a short-term solution. It's not the long-term solution that I think any of us want.
Yep.
Is it also the case, sorry, that if, because I'm remembering this from the Hutchinson bond, if you are making improvements of some sort above a certain dollar amount, it triggers the need to have a building become ADA accessible? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes. For existing buildings, there are different trigger points. It's more than 50% of the cost of the replacement value. You get 100% compliance. It bumps you into another level of renovation. And I think that your heating system and ventilation and air conditioning are going to do that in a lot of spaces. Mm-hmm. And just to add a little bit about Siwanoy is because of the split level configuration, there's not a really good place for an elevator that does not displace a classroom on each floor. So you can, if you had to put 2 elevators into Siwanoy, it could take away 6 classrooms. There would still be some space left for instructional support. So we tried to put in a placeholder for a standalone elevator of $500,000, but I don't really know where we would put it. That, you could put one right on the front of the building, which would look awful and no one would want. But, because both wings are at split level to the center, there's really no way that one elevator, or maybe an elevator and a lift, would work. But it's going to trigger you to think about other things besides just an elevator.
Yeah. And one of the things, and not to get too in the weeds on it too, I think some of the location that was looked at for those is also where some of the only bathrooms in the building are. So in addition to classrooms.
And they
you'd be
kind of
looking at-
need a redo as well. So,
That's why I raised that.
Yeah.
The few that there are definitely need some renovation.
yeah. Pelham Middle School's in pretty good shape. You're getting some HVAC units replaced, that's underway. You still have a little bit of masonry repair to do, but it's time to redo the roof. And there might be a discussion about a better secure entrance for the middle school, high school.
How in this work that you put together, how do you determine what security improvements are recommended?
We're looking mostly at secure vestibules at the front of the building. And at the front of the high school, you get, there's a camera and you're buzzed in and you're in. That's not a secure vestibule. It's the best you can do. Your security guys are wonderful. They almost know who we are now. But
It's good to be skeptical when you work the front door.
yep. But it's really not a great setup, because what you really want is what exists at Hutch, which is you get into a locked vestibule, you're vetted, and then you're let into the rest of the building. That, if there's a bad actor, that's a secure place. There's actually a ballistic rating on that glass in Hutch. Colonial, you're let in, but you go upstairs, so you're kind of in the building, and if students were coming down the stairs, there would be an intermingling. Siwanoy is a similar thing. Prospect Hill has a nice new secure vestibule. So that's sort of our standard. You can do a lot more with cameras. I think we have some money in here for cameras. But the general thinking in the world of school security is, if you can do this visitor secure vestibule, that's the one main physical intervention that is good. And that person, if they can sit in a way so they can see outside a potential person coming, is also good, which at Colonial you can't do, and more importantly here at the high school, that person has no visibility to the front. One little camera, but you could have a vehicle coming at the building and they wouldn't know it until it arrived. So the capacity issues at the middle school and high school are also sort of a big question mark. So you saw earlier in the capacity study that the middle school has got adequate capacity, but the middle school uses rooms in the high school to get that capacity. So one of the strategies might be, let's add some rooms closer to the middle school, let the high school be itself, have all the rooms in the high school, and that would solve the high school's capacity problem. That's one strategy. You could take it the other way and build rooms for the high school and keep sharing. There is also sort of a qualitative issue with the science labs and the annex for the high school, which are really in need of renovation and update. There's some square footage issues there when it compares to Regents level science. And then, you know, when you're looking at facilities, you should look at everything you do, including offsite and rental space. So it would be ideal if there was a way to get the district office back on the middle school, high school campus. And one of the ways to do that might be to build new for classrooms and renovate existing space for the administration. So, you know, the high school still has a lot of needs. Obviously, the heating system here, and it's a big building, so it's expensive. Getting piping through this building will not be simple. It is not lightweight construction. So these walls here between the spaces in the corridor have chases in them for piping, but taking them apart and finding piping pathways will be expensive. You do have a portion of this roof that needs to be replaced. You do have windows that need to be replaced here. And also, if you take a tour of this building and just look at the classroom interiors and the older parts of the building, they're pretty dated. So back to security, one of the things that might be worth looking at is a visitor entrance off Franklin that serves both the middle school and high school and has a secure vestibule, so that this front entrance would be open for students in the morning and dismissal, and then locked. And the only way visitors get in is go to Franklin, where we can create visibility and a secure vestibule.
Russ, a couple of questions. I think Jackie had some questions.
And I know we have Dr. Callahan here. Can you talk a little bit more about what a renovated science lab would look like?
I think we'll need you to come to the mic for the recording. And since you're up, can you, in 30-second version, in addition to what Jackie asked, can you talk a little bit about the difference in content areas? Because I know we've got several issues around the science labs. We don't have enough.
Yeah.
We don't have enough content-specific ones, and they need updating
Yeah,
and
so-
square footage.
So there's the updating piece where, I mean, if you just go up there, you would want to modernize the furniture, but there's also some safety issues. So we have physics classes that are in chemistry labs. We have to put classes in chemistry labs you wouldn't want to put in chemistry labs because there are safety issues. There's also, moving supplies around in the hallway that you wouldn't want to move around, and it's a busy building, so that's a dangerous thing to be doing. So there's issues related to safety. There's some updating that's needed with regard to some of the plumbing issues and sinks, but also there's a lot of wasted space in the annex. So they're designed really, and Russ could probably speak to this a little bit more than I can, but the perimeters of the labs are all lab tables, and it takes up a ton of space. So it's a lot of wasted space if you were to modernize and put some new lab equipment in there. So, if you're updating for capacity reasons, I think you could recover some space there. But in addition to that, you could also modernize the spaces a little bit, use that space a little bit more efficiently. But the other piece to it is we don't have equipment that some of the new updated labs have, like fume hoods that are really working fume hoods. But even things as simple as like, ice machines and things like that, if you're talking about just the equipment and stuff like that. But I mean, the other thing too is that we don't have enough labs and I'm not talking about electives, we don't have enough labs for the number of core science classes that we have. So we are short any given period of a lab to house a science classroom in. So we come up short pretty much every period. So we have to get creative with how we use that space.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's we've grown those programs tremendously under Dr. Callahan's leadership. So that's the good news. And that's created then this challenge of just not having enough space to really accommodate. It's the number of students that we have taking chemistry and physics is like pretty much second to none. It's very high participation rates regionally and just everywhere. So it's a blessing. It's a wonderful thing. Our kids really strive in these STEM areas, in all areas, but in particular, I think we've grown so much there. But that's the net result of that is you just need more classrooms outfitted appropriately for that subject area. So thank you.
So the last question, and at the beginning of this presentation, is sort of the other, but we've touched on some of this as we went through. This is not included in the $95 million number, so this is all in addition to that. But we talked about a Colonial and Siwanoy and perhaps Prospect Hill even, additional dedicated cafeteria space. Colonial will also, similar to Siwanoy, if we had to do that, you would have to connect through existing classrooms, so you would at least have to replace those. And you really have some undersized rooms in Colonial. Would be good to add a complement of full-size rooms. Siwanoy, we talked about the elevator, cafeteria space, and full-size classrooms. And at Siwanoy, it's not, the minimum size for a kindergarten room in New York State is 900 square feet. They're not 890 square feet at Siwanoy. They're 600. So they're 30% below the state minimum. So they're very significantly off. And some of the upper grade levels are similar. They're off at Siwanoy and Colonial. You accommodate it. You find a way to get the kids in there. They learn just
The
great.
teachers are amazing.
Right. And the stuff that's in the rooms is amazing that they rotate through. But And we talked about the middle high school, about classroom space, maybe a student commons, certainly science rooms, and the district office. So those are all stuff that should be looked at in concert with your building conditions survey work, because we find that it's best if you address things holistically, not sort of item by item. You know, so you would never replace a countertop in your kitchen without doing the backsplash, or and most likely you're going to renovate the whole kitchen. You know, my mother wanted a new kitchen floor about 40 years ago, and my father said, you know, after the addition was done, that that was a very expensive floor. But that's the right way to do it. So maybe I'll take a drink of water and let Walt talk about a typical process from here. That's all right.
And while you transition, I'll just point out for the board, in section tab 6 of your binder, I just put a little kind of a side-by-side comparison of some of the different facilities elements. We've talked, section 6, that we've kind of talked about these throughout the evening, but, you know, if you look at Hutchinson as our model building, and then compare things like, you know, enough classrooms for each sections, having flex space for fluctuation in number of sections, looking at things like ADA accessibility, a lot of the things that have been mentioned tonight. But if you want to just get a sense of side by side what each school has relative to that model, you can get a sense there, which may help us as we start to continue to talk and think about prioritizing. Because those things all do have impacts on instruction. We can certainly talk more about that. And then when you go to the second page of that, since we don't have a side-by-side model for middle school, high school, what I did share there was, again, just reiterating some of what came up as some of the more issues that impact instruction in the school program more, and try to just share, you know, what it seems like that particular impact is, whether it's a capacity-related, program-related, instruction-related. So that may also help us to prioritize those areas once we get to that stage of the conversation. So just wanted to point that out for your information.
So it was a lot of information from Russ. Everybody seems okay. Take a deep breath. So just a quick comment on the building condition survey and the 5-year plan. You know, in the context of the facilities you own, the dollar value is not a number that jumps out to us as inordinate or unusual. In fact, it's in line with what we see with other districts. But the dollar value unto itself of $99 million is a lot of money, in my view. And I just want to preface it by saying everything that we've shown you is nothing there is a mandate. Your buildings, again, I'll reiterate, are in very good condition. And the fact that your needs are mostly falling in priority 3 and priority 4 is an indication that you have well-maintained pieces of your building that have served you well for many years. And you're at the appropriate time to start making decisions about them through good planning and capital maintenance, and it's the time to develop a fiscally responsible plan. As opposed to being in a condition where you have priority 2 elements that are in failure and your hand is forced. So the question then becomes, where do we go from here? And I think we heard earlier on that one of the next steps we'll be talking about, you know, the financing opportunities that are available to the district moving forward. Obviously, that's a very important piece. And then developing a plan to prioritize all of the items that have been put on the table today, and pair that in a cohesive, comprehensive, and sensible plan that provides the maximum benefit for the district, maintains your buildings, provides the best possible instructional spaces, and is done in a fiscally responsible manner. And I think, you know, this is the beginning of that plan, and I would say the first steps are indicating that we're all headed in the right direction in terms of the elements are in the correct place. You're planning replacements of systems at the appropriate time when they, quote unquote, owe you nothing. A slate roof that you've had in service for 100 years, that's wonderful, that's great, but it is time to replace it. But it's not urgent, it's not in failure. So those are all key components I think it's important to understand. So typically a pre-referendum or capital planning process of this nature unfolds in roughly 3 to 6 months, 8 months to develop a plan, to prioritize it, and figure out what fits within your budget and your opportunities. So We would be happy to participate in that and work with your facilities committee to help distill the projects that are in the work that's been identified in the building condition survey and discussed relative to your capacity and programming needs, and help you figure out a way to fit that into the budget available. So once a project is approved, it's important to know that it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take at least 9 to 12 months to design something and get it permitted through New York State, and then most likely another 12 to 24 months to build something. So at a minimum, from the point at which a project, we got a green light to start design work on it, we're probably talking about 3 years from now when something actually gets constructed, put into place, and is opened or finished or turned on. So this is a lengthy process, but we have all the elements in place to start moving forward. So
I think you said the next step is us prioritizing, right?
yes.
Do we have an idea of when we'll actually prioritize it? And the second question to that is, how will we engage the community in that process?
Yeah. So I guess a couple thoughts. I think certainly after, we've heard a lot tonight. I think we want a chance to talk as well. There are obviously a lot of complexities to this, a lot of complications, competing interests, things that we're going to have to wade through. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about those, and also what additional clarifications and information that the board may need. So whether that's clarifications on what you've heard tonight, additional follow-up information. So I think we're going to need that to, in order to prepare to prioritize. One of the ideas that when Jim and John and I met with Russ and Walter that surfaced was the potential of, should we move forward with the bond feasibility work, that maybe once they get farther through into that process, do a little more refinement of the work that we're looking at here, that we meet and do another work session. Maybe a little bit, maybe not a 9:30 at night session, but maybe a Saturday, sometime when we're fresher, to really dig in and be able to go more deeply into more refined costs and project, and then use a protocol and process, to really identify what are our criteria, what are our priorities, and what is the budget, what is the financing. I think we need that information as well before we can really start to make any prioritized decisions. And I think that can play out over the next couple of months. So I would say questions and clarifications tonight about what more you need. Certainly direction for Russ and Walter about next steps. Do we want them to go forward? And certainly we would come to the board for a formal authorization of that at our next meeting. But to ask them to go forward and to start more detailed bond feasibility work. Jim has already reached out to Capital Markets, our financial advisor, and has set up meetings with them to talk to the Finance Committee, and we're hoping to get them to come to our October 23rd meeting to talk to the board about long-term financial picture and debt service schedule, kind of what do we currently have, what is the landscape of that, timing of that, to help us get the financial assessment, to help us decide then what might also be financially something tenable for us to look at. So I think once we have all of those pieces together, I think an in-depth work session with a protocol to make that priority discussion and decision would be helpful. So we do have time. I guess that's the other piece. We don't have forever, but I think, a couple months of really thoughtful work and collecting more information is going to be very helpful to that process. To your question about seeking input from the community, certainly tonight, I think, is the start of that process. Alex will be putting out our usual, board wrap-up. But he and I had talked about some ideas, maybe me going to all the PTAs and having a way to communicate with staff to really inform them about kind of the findings of the building conditions study, so that there's a little bit of education on the front end about where we are and what what the study has shown. And then maybe doing some kind of survey follow-up. If we're saying these are the kinds of things that we're seeing and thinking and have identified as areas of priority or areas of need, are we missing anything? Get some feedback and thoughts on that. Potentially, I know that we've got the schedule of board coffees that we've gotten set up. Maybe doing some additional work there. So I think educating, surveying, doing some engagement to get some qualitative feedback on the front end. And then certainly, we get to the point of deciding on a scope, I think then we also will continue with that engagement afterwards. The other piece that Jim and I talked about, it's maybe not directly to this question, but I think it does speak to the engagement and will help with some of the prioritization. In the past, we had a broader group, the Bond Steering Committee, Bond Steering. We may be time to reactivate that group and we've got our Facilities Committee, which is wonderful. We've got 3 community members there, but with a Bond Steering Committee that we've had in the past, we broadened that to a much larger group. I really look for folks with specific areas of expertise in the areas that we were looking. So when we knew that we were looking potentially at a new school at Hutchinson, there was a lot of rock removal. What do we have in our community? Somebody who's an expert on that. So we found those experts who were in the committee and invited them to be part of that process. So I think those are some natural next steps that I would foresee for us over the next couple of months. I don't know, gentlemen, if you had anything that you would also recommend adding in there, or Jim, if you had anything I missed.
You covered it well. It's almost like you've done this before.
I did pull out the binder from last time.
I
It
would
brought
just
back some
remind
fond
you, just like
memories.
we did though at Hutchinson, if you do stumble upon a big question, that it's always a good idea to pause and address it. And, that was done with Hutchinson with, I think, 14 addition and alteration options before it became clear that it needed to be replaced. So take the time. And be flexible. And we always think that, consensus building is involved in listening. And so we're here to help you with the listening as well.
Just one question. Looking at the,
Fresh off of a back to school night. Thank you, Ms. Sabia, for joining us.
Is that why we couldn't park anywhere?
Yes. And that's why we're in Alumni Hall tonight, because the middle school had more important things to do.
So the slides that you had, I thought were really helpful with sort of high level for a bunch of different buckets for the different schools. And then I see in the condition study, there's like 15 pages of
Layers of detail.
chart that you need a magnifying glass to look at.
Have you read that?
Is there something in between that sort of would describe at least the next level of specificity, project and cost, so we could start thinking about like prioritizing for things beyond the bucket of like, there's obviously like the heating systems and stuff, and maybe that's one area where we just like either we're gonna do it or not, and then what type, but then there's windows, there's roofs, there's like a whole, probably couple pages of lists of other things, and sort of starting to think about which of those are most important. Maybe it would be helpful to get a little more
We
color.
were asked that last week, and we
Okay.
couldn't do it
Okay,
in this amount of time,
uh-huh,
which is the must-haves,
okay,
based on the professionals. What are the must-haves?
yeah,
And so we will do that.
Great.
And there's a way to combine them in projects. So, that's, we're starting to make judgments for you when we do that. But we'll take a shot at it, but it's adjustable. We would really like to carry that forward with you and say, hey, we're kind of thinking here. And, you probably can already tell, an elevator at Simonway. Handicap accessibility at that building. I think ventilation is really important, whether you do steam or hot water or air conditioning. But filtered fresh air in an energy efficient way, especially in your elementaries, is really important. So we can do that, and there's a lot of information there. I mean, it's a giant spreadsheet. It goes down to every cost, and as we said this morning, I think it was you asked the question, there's a trade cost, a ceiling tile cost. Ceilings cost $15 a square foot to replace, and we add on to that a design contingency, a construction contingency, general conditions, overhead and profit, project cost to pay your architect and your construction manager and your finance advisor. So these are loaded costs, because when you add them up, it's everything you need to deliver this.
We can work a little bit on making them more digestible project groupings, because I think what you see in the backup, the pages and pages and pages of Excel spreadsheets is that it's specific line items that don't necessarily show the relationship to
Yep.
one another. So we can try to do that by building and sort of by rough type of work.
Okay.
So there's a little bit more of a menu to understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be helpful.
Yeah, and I know, I was just gonna say, last time, just on that same note, I know that they were able to prioritize, say, masonry projects for us. And, you know, put it into 3 different buckets of most urgent next. So we could stage it out even from just the work construction process. But also that gave us the option to say, okay, are we going to do 1, 2, or all 3 of those buckets? Or are we gonna do part and postpone some for later? So that kind of prioritization is definitely helpful.
And it sounds like it's sort of incorporated, because we were talking about capacity, as a long-term, but the must-haves today, and then if we're thinking 3 years from now, how we're thinking about, will then there be new must-haves by the time we, sort of broke ground, or is that kind of thinking included in the
Unfortunately, it's the
must-haves?
nature of kind of building ownership, right? The must-haves always, they kind of keep coming at you over time. The sign of good capital planning and maintenance is the must-haves remain in those 3 and 4 categories. And certainly, the expectation is you'll take care of some of the work identified in the building condition survey, not all of it, and other things will grow into that as they age out over time. So that's a normal cycle of how it goes.
Yeah.
That actually
Just to be clear, we've never seen everybody say, let's do it. It's always a prioritization, and it's almost always a mixture of sort of the program work with the infrastructure work. Because you are gonna go to the public, and they care about the qualitative aspects of your school buildings, not just the stuff behind the walls. So I think that's where you really need you to work, who has the pulse of the community, and understand, what the Siwone parents, Colonial parents, high school parents really feel about their building. What are they gonna feel good about saying yes to?
So I have a question about state aid. What does that look like? When will we know more? Would it be when it's completely flushed out? I mean, is that like the unknown?
Okay, yeah, that's something that capital markets actually helps us with.
Okay.
And if I recall from last time as well, they work in partnership with the architects who have a sense of kind of the flow of how state aid is allocated for different projects, renovations, this and that. They know the ins and outs. I'm not gonna.
Capital markets will have their head around what your aid rates, what your maximum cost allowances are, which is state aid formula talk. We can help them decipher what would be aidable under the
Right.
formulas, and we'll work together with them to determine ultimately, then, whatever options we look at, how the aid would affect those options. But the aid is project-specific, so it depends what the work is.
Right, and new construction is less aidable than renovation, and you're probably looking at mostly renovation.
Correct.
So it's gonna probably be a higher aidability than your last project was at Hutch. But we worked with them to project aid at Hutch, and I believe the final aid was higher, so.
And without asking you to project the future necessarily, how concerned should we be about the heating systems lasting 3 to 5 years while we do these projects?
I think there's a way to get them through. But I don't think they all should wait for your next 5-year plan.
Right. Okay.
Jim, will we take some of these security recommendations to the safety committee? And, we've done some, obviously, smaller capital projects out of our reserves.
Yes.
Can you just talk a little bit about that, and just talk about what we've done out of reserves, and is there the potential to potentially do something, obviously not this whole,
Right.
obviously this whole thing out of reserves, because we need the reserves to deal with any headwinds coming our way budget-wise, but.
Absolutely.
can you
So,
speak to that a little?
just to give an example, we have, the district has used reserves for capital projects. 2 years ago, if you recall, the voters approved $2 million use of capital of reserves to pay for the new HVAC units, which hopefully will be installed at the middle school over this next summer, as well as the playground replacement at at Colonial School. So that was an example of us using those reserves for a capital project. Every year as part of the annual budget, the board also has the opportunity to allocate capital dollars for a specific capital project if they so chose. And that would be just on a regular annual process. You look at some school districts, the Greenberg School District, they've never passed a capital bond. So, historically. That's correct, right? So, they tried to do it a few years ago, it didn't happen. But again, that's another way you can do it. Certainly look at the scope of work, the portfolio of work that we have here. I don't think you're gonna look at your reserves and say that we got it all taken care of. You mentioned, we talk about headwinds, and that's exactly right. We have peaks and valleys when revenue is good, other times when revenue is not so good. Today, the Fed cut interest rates by 0.5 point. We're gonna talk about that in the spring when we look at our interest income, because that'll be reflected in next year's budget when we look at our interest income projections. So these are all things that happen, and that's why you wanna have those reserves. And as you look at your fund balance, and reserves are a component of fund balance, I get really technical, I won't. But really, we look at the fund balance in the history of the school district, that's really the accumulation of surplus over the history of the school district. So it's not something that's just a 1 or a 5-year item. These are just surpluses that have been generated in the perpetuity of the district. So hopefully that's helpful.
It is.
And again, with CMA, we had very, very positive work out of them in the last bond. Their partner, Rick Yancey, came. He spoke and presented at a district work session. Their grasp around the process is very strong. And we found that their work was very good as far as going into the bond process. And of course, they're always going to give you numbers that are more conservative, and we want them to be that way. And we were very fortunate in having very positive bond and borrowing costs when we actually went to market. So that was great too. They're going to spend some time. They look at our debt schedule. They look at our aid. And then based on that, they can help the committee. We're going to work with Finance Committee first, and then they'll come to the overall board so the board can have an idea and provide direction.
I'm just going to echo things that my friend Jim has said to me. We need to be strategic in our use of those reserves.
Yes.
For those headwinds. And the other piece too, and I remember it from last time through, we also want to be cognizant of our bond rating. And I know that our reserve levels also, play a factor in that. And if we are looking at borrowing, we have to also put that on the, in the mix of balance that we want to keep in mind.
That's a great point. If you chew up your reserves, your bond rating will be lowered, and then your borrowing costs are higher. So you will pay more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have anything else to add?
I don't.
Or if not, I would say, does any of the board have any more questions or clarifications or additional information that you would like to, like for us or for the architects to provide? I will say, the other piece of this too is, what are the questions that are going to be out there? And you may not know all those now, but I think that's part of our process as well, is to be thinking about what questions do you have as board members, but then we know our community is very engaged and very, very sophisticated and very thoughtful about these matters. So what are the kinds of questions that we will also want to be able to, to address to our community? So I think it's time to be thinking about those things as well. So.
And I have a question about, this whole process takes 3 years from start to finish before we'll have like permanent solutions. I'm thinking specifically about the air conditioning, because I know that that's on a lot of people's minds. So will you also be helping us, like if we need to find interim solutions, or like what those are, and walking us through sort of what our options are in terms of like functionality versus cost versus time?
Yeah, we definitely can help you with interim solutions. The other thing is it takes 3 years, but parts of it will be done in phases. So not everything will take that long. But, we're working with a couple schools now that are on 3-year air conditioning cycles. So a third of the building comes on year one, the next year two. So obviously, start at the top, at Siwanoy and Colonial. So it's not everything, it's just compared to like home renovations or when you see a retail store getting built, institutional construction that's permitted out of Albany with public bids is a slow process.
That's a perfect opportunity for me to provide an update too, because I know we had some parents asking. I know the board will remember at the end of last year, we had a lot of conversations about air conditioning, and the governor has some legislation on her desk, not signed yet, but I think all signs are pointing to that becoming a reality. So over the summer, John Condon worked with, I think I got some engineering done through through KG&D.
Our team helped with the
Yeah,
engineering.
they assisted with some engineering for us as a temporary short-term measure, to look at outfitting the top floors of the unair-conditioned buildings with window units. So we've been working with Synertia as our district electrician. I believe they've completed the wiring necessary at Siwanoy. I think they're moved on to Prospect Hill. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're hoping to, and John, correct me if I'm overstating or leaving anything out, over the course of the next couple of weeks, hoping to finish the wiring and then starting to install units. Yes. At the elementary, our goal was to have the elementaries done sometime this fall, and then after that, we'll start working our way through the high school, which is a much bigger endeavor. But we recognize, given these kinds of timelines, that we have to start doing something on the interim. So while it's a little frustrating to spend money and time and work now to do that, knowing that we're contemplating what we are tonight, we also know that we've got at least 3 years before we get there,
Yeah.
if we're being realistic.
Some of those electrical upgrades are actually being designed to be convertible to
Excellent.
the permanent.
That's great.
I have just one quick question too, as it relates to sort of the possibilities to explore, just in regards to the process, and if some of them are pretty general, do you have ballpark costs to those as well? What would be the process if we identified sort of these possibilities to explore, and where does that sort of fit into this?
So during a pre-bond process, and some people may remember Hutch, we actually do conceptual design for classroom additions. So you'll see pictures, plans, sort of very loose massing renderings, and you'll say, that's a $13 million addition to Siwanoy that gets you new kindergarten, new fifth grade, a new cafeteria. It would go here, it would look like that.
With
So-
conceptual budgets as well.
And you'll see,
That's
and you'll see the budgets, and we'll probably do multiple iterations.
Thank you.
And that's part of the pre-bond process. And, that's where it can be great, and people can say, we need to do that, or they can say, oh, that's so much, well, let's look at this option or that option, and you need to take the time to explore what you need to see, to have confidence in what you're moving forward with.
And-
Just to,
Okay.
okay. I was gonna say, to follow up on that with, let me just go back to the slide, the possibility slide. When you're looking, when we look at, or when I look at this, there are so many possibilities, right, and at every single school. How do you approach, this is putting aside the $99 million worth of that work. How do you approach something like this in a way that allows you to effectively prioritize this? Like, in your experience, have you worked with other districts that have had, I know you said you've worked with districts that have had buildings as old as ours, this is the nature of the area we live in, but how do you actually prioritize something when there's such big projects at every single school?
Again, completely normal. We've done this time and time again, and the real question is, how do you prioritize? Because if you want 5 versions of how to add a cafeteria to Colonial, we can have that to you in 2 weeks with budgets. We're
Settle down.
we won't be the issue.
Right.
It'll be, how do you prioritize it? And, again, the program and capacity-related issues married with the higher priority infrastructure. That's what this pre-bond process will be. There's a lot of information tonight, those meetings, and I agree with Cheryl, it might be better to do one of those that's not in the evening, but whether it's the board as a whole or a steering committee, you need to go through, you need to look, you need to think about what's now, what's next, who had additions done prior, who didn't, and all those issues. But we don't see that as that exhaustive a list. That's an easy list from our point of view. And you know, we like the idea of testing ideas with design. So you're going to see something and go, oh my goodness, that's going to take up a lot of the Simon-Oid playground, but it'll be worth it. You know, you'll actually see it on that site.
Thank you.
I was wondering, and I hesitate to ask questions I don't know the answer to sometimes, but Dr.
Lawyers
Champ,
never
have
do
you,
that.
It's a safe, we're in a safe space. There's no camera. It's fine. I'm kidding.
have you thought about what sort of process you want to go through in terms of, we've talked a lot about, you know, non-program renovations, so heating and air conditioning, but like the deciding between science labs and some other renovations that are more program focused, like how we ought to think about priorities there. I don't know if you've thought internally about how, I don't want to turn this into a free-for-all between the different departments who everyone has needs and there are important things going on, and but I don't know, we should think a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I you know, I mean, there's different processes and protocols that we've used in the past. The one that I tend to default to is one that identifies what are the priorities and criteria for the decision. And I think that's one.
That was my question, is do
Yeah.
we have something in the past that we can build?
We
that
can,
map
I
of-
think we, yes,
That's
we can maybe
okay.
build off it. I think we need a more streamlined version, is what I was
Yes.
gonna say, I'll just put it
Okay.
that way. But I think, having gone through that process before, I think we can probably refine it.
That's great.
Because I think if you get too many different criterias, then you get the paralysis by analysis
No, totally, it's a great
situation,
tool, it
right?
almost gives
Yes.
you the answer.
Yeah,
It's
so I
an
think that's
effective
some of
tool.
the conversation we as a board should be having over these next couple months, is exactly that. What are the priorities? Because there's gonna be competing interests, and we're not gonna be able to do it all. We are gonna have to, to make some difficult decisions. But I think if we've got that kind of, what are our values, our priorities, and things that are most important, that's gonna help us. So that's where my head goes on those.
Actually, we have the three principles. I'm staring at you. Because a lot of what we discussed here was about your schools, and you live in it day in and day out. Is there anything that you heard here today that we missed, we didn't cover, anything that you felt like, hey, this wasn't covered, or basically we covered it all?
Would you come to the microphone? Yeah, sorry. You know, and one thing, while they're coming up too, one of the things that we did talk with Russ and Walter about is we do want them to take a little deeper look at the air conditioning issue because of where we are, because of our buildings, because we've got patchwork systems here and there. That's something we've already talked about as they move forward with pre-bond work. They're gonna have to look a bit more deeply at refining that approach to air conditioning. So just as a point of information, but to the.
So to answer your question and jump in, I think you covered it all. I think safety is obviously priority, so we talked about the roofing, the windows, air conditioning, heating, things like that. That's obviously a priority to us. Spacing, additional classrooms. We talked about the needs of Prospect Hill. Obviously, with my bubble of 2 graduating, if I had 3 sections of kindergarten coming in, some of the classrooms that are not ideal, as Russ described, will have to become classrooms, and I think it's the same at the other buildings. And I think cafeterias, it's a huge scheduling issue. We're lucky enough that we have staff that steps up for us and supervises lunch, but realize that we're covering all of our students in an hour with all of our teachers at lunch. So if they chose not to work that duty, we'd have to find, Trish would be very busy as our fabulous new HR director, because she'd have to find a lot of monitors to cover the kids, because again, that's the safety issue that comes up. So I think those are the priorities. Anything you guys want to add?
No, I think you hit Cyanoid right on the head. I mean, the kindergarten classrooms, the size of those are youngest learners that need the most space. We're very undersized, and you know, we just don't have space for much. We make do with what we have because, you know, we talk to each other, we work together, our teachers are great. We do a good job of trying to manage in those spaces, but it's
ultimately,
evident.
more space is always better.
Yeah, like the cafeteria, to Janine's point, would be a game changer. An elevator, but taking away 3 classrooms for an elevator, I mean,
You can't do
yeah.
it,
But an elevator is nice. My custodian would love an elevator to help out, so,
Mobility
yeah.
He can
Thank
use
you.
exercise.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Just stay up here and talk on this microphone all night.
And I'm going to put him on the spot because no one else has asked the question tonight. And I know he's new to the role, so this is an early question to ask. And we've only had about, how many days of school? 8 days? Just wondering if Mr. Llewellyn could give us any insight on the cafeteria situation. I know that we give credit to Dr. Titone, who gave her a task, a challenge of working with the master schedule to see if we could better manage the cafeteria space issues. And I know that the high school worked with middle school administration this summer too, really hard on looking at the space. So can you just give us some early feedback on what you're seeing in the cafeteria? Recognizing we have not had a really bad weather day. That's going to be the true proof in the pudding day, but Mr. Llewellyn. Tomorrow, okay. We'll come back next week and let you know how it goes.
So, thank you, everybody. Like Dr. Champ said, it's really difficult to say until we've had a rainy day what our lunch looks like. I will say my thanks go out to the middle school. I think we have a great example of what happens when the middle school and the high school works really well together. And it was really because of their compromises that we were able to open up some additional space for high school kids at lunch. But it is complicated because we have an open campus for 3/4 of our students at the moment. And high school students' patterns around lunch and socializing change through the years. So one of the things that you'll notice right now is that 9th graders haven't necessarily figured out that they're 9th graders yet. So they are actually sitting at tables of 12 all jammed in together like they would have as middle schoolers, not realizing that they don't have to do that anymore because that's what they were used to and very comfortable with. And when you look at sophomores, juniors, seniors, whether they're staying on campus or when they're leaving campus, they're more hanging out in groups of 2 or 3 or 4. It's just a different pattern for them. What our current status is we've taken what was a conference room and was then a computer room and then was a lunchroom and then was a peanut-free room and just made it high school seating. We've actually had a little trouble getting kids in there to the point where we're kind of walking around like there's this really cool air-conditioned space where you can spread out and please go try it out. But, old patterns die hard. The other thing that we did was we took part of Cafeteria C, and that's our large kind of sunken cafeteria, like you think you're going into a swimming pool, and taken the back area that can be closed off. Didn't close it off, but said, okay, for periods 4 and 5, where we're a little bit lighter because the current 6th and 7th grades are not as big as our 8th grade, which is quite a bit bigger, that could be seating for high school kids. I haven't seen any high school kids ever sit there because in their mind, that's the middle school. If I'm a 9th grader, I don't want to be there anymore. That's where I used to be. If I'm a 10th, 11th, and 12th grader, no one's ever sat there, so why would I sit there? So, a lot of this is kind of trying to manage the psychology of the students. I will say that tons of kids who can go off campus for lunch are going off campus for lunch, if they have a lunch. And I will say that when you look at stairwells and other sort of corners of the building and things like the benches that are out here, you know, those are areas that when there are a lot of students there, they're there because they found nowhere else to go. It's not a place where students really want to go and hang out. To be honest with you, a lot of those nooks and crannies are places where students go when they want to be alone. So, you know, and it's, you know, listen, everybody's entitled to want to be alone some of the time. You know, if we have kids that we're worried about, you know, we work with them, we try to hook them up with other students. But, you know, sometimes our kids are just, I want to eat my sandwich in peace for 5 minutes and then move on, and so I'm going to sit here and not bother anybody. And typically we're not, you know, on a security level, not bothering those students. If we had 5 kids who are being rowdy in an area where they're going to interrupt classes, we're going to move them along. But to be honest with you, it hasn't happened in any of the days of school that we've had yet. So, you know, keeping in mind that I really want to be able to speak more intelligently to this once I see what's happening in the rain, in thinking about the future of, you know, when we think about the belonging and wellness pillar of our strategic plan, and we think about, you know, our digital device policies, right? We think about students being able to have face-to-face interactions and being better at face-to-face interactions, because, you know, moving from the middle school to the high school, after COVID, one of the things we really saw with the middle school kids is kids that had missed out on unstructured face-to-face interactions were not that great at it anymore. What they had gotten very good at was, you know, being on a headset, playing a computer game, and kind of yelling curses and off-color things at the other kids that were playing the game. Now we throw them together on a field, you know, with other kids, and they don't know how to make eye contact. They don't know how to read other people's emotions. They don't know how to empathize in the same way. And so they're getting into fights over nothing because they've lost those skills. I think by and large, since COVID, a lot of the kids have gotten a lot better at that. We're not seeing those same problems. But still, when we talk about making these kids into successful adults, you know, you need to be able to look me in the eye across a table. You need to be able to read social cues. You need to be able to have a, you know, carry on a conversation. Go into a setting where you don't know people and be comfortable with that and meet people. So, you know, it's really difficult in the context of, we've already spent $100 million, so now if you're going to spend more money on top of that. But, you know, I think the dream for student social interaction would be if we were to expand the footprint of where classrooms are and build new classrooms, build new science labs from the ground up, for example. And there was space in all of that for a commons area that was closer in line with, you know, what you see on college campuses, where there's variety of seating that invites groups of 4, kids who want to sit alone at a counter, you know, et cetera. More of a hangout that is sort of, you have that sweet spot of semi-supervision. So one of the things I did in my life outside of education is I've done a lot of volunteerism around young people, and you know, coming up with activities for kids and providing opportunities for them along the lines of like what Pelham Together does for us here. And one of the things we found when you talk to kids is, you know, they want to be lightly supervised. So they don't want to have adults staring at them. They're not going to have any fun. They're not going to feel comfortable in that setting. You know, and I think the high school kids demonstrate by and large that they're fine with that. You know, we have our 2 small commons areas in the stairs as you walk up the stairs. You can fit maybe, you know, 15 kids comfortably in each of those. And I think because of that consciousness of, you know, wow, I'm in an open space, so there's no adult staring at me. I'm not in a supervised study hall or supervised cafeteria with a monitor, but I'm conscious that I'm open to the rest of the building and my voice will carry. Kids are by and large eating quietly, talking quietly, doing their work. You know, but you can semi-socialize. You know, our library, I mean, I wouldn't change a thing. It's the most beautiful library in the whole world. If you've ever sat at any of those tables, though, you can't interact with other human beings because you have a light that's right in front of your eyeballs. But again, they're great, they're beautiful brass reading lamps, but you can't see anybody. So I would love for there to be space in the vision, if we can get past all of those other amazingly important things, to provide students with something, you know, for the high school kids, where we're not middle schoolers anymore. We don't need to sit at tables of 12. We don't want to sit at tables of 12. But we would like somewhere you know, to have our high school feel like a home for us, so we don't have to leave campus, even if we can. You know, because the other piece that makes me nervous at times is if, God forbid, we were in a situation where there was civil unrest going on for a period of time, or for whatever reason we didn't feel comfortable having an open campus for a period of months. We're really not set up to do that. We're very dependent upon the open campus, to the point where during COVID we opened it to all 4 grades because we just couldn't handle the seating. So that's my 2 cents. And I'm happy to come back after the first rainy or snowy day and talk about how we handled that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so thank you, Russ and Walter. Really appreciate your time, your expertise, all the preparation, and the wisdom that you bring to this. I think from the board, what I would say is, as you think about this and process it, start to send me questions, anything that you want follow-up on, additional information on, so that as we start to go through these next steps, we can start to provide you with whatever information you need in that regard. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think with that, I think we do have a public comment. So I guess we do have a public comment, but I do not want to hold the administrative team here any longer. Thank you so much for being here, your presence, your feedback, your wisdom, your advocacy. Appreciate it all, and I wish you all a great night. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Russ and Walter, I think same to you. Thank you so much. You started with us at 8 a.m. this morning, so safe ride home, and appreciate everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, give him just a second. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I figured he might want to. Okay.
Do we have, do you want to make a public comment?
No. Okay.
I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.